Now, I'm very sure that you and I agree that this world is unfair, unjust, and random. Now, there are two ways to deal with this. The first one is trying to reduce the amount of unfairness and randomness and unjustness. The only problem is nature is massive and it has many moving parts. And humans have figured out only the tip of the iceberg. So there's only a certain amount we can reduce the uncertainty and unpredictability of life. The average human used to live till the age of 40 about 100 years ago. But today, through our fight with randomness and unfairness and unjustness of the human body and of nature, we have managed to bring that up to 80 to 90 years in India. The second and a very effective way to deal with this unjustness and randomness is to adopt the school of study known as Stoicism. Stoicism asks a very simple question at its center, right? If the world is random and unjust and unfair, why does it bother you? It bothers you because you have a brain and your brain perceives the world. It perceives others, it perceives other situations, it perceives your situations, and then creates a model of whether you are thriving in your environment or you're not. Your brain is always perceiving that. And what Stoicism says is that an unjust random world only affects this part of the brain's processing. It only affects us because we think and we worry and we create comparisons. Stoicism says the cure to that is to change the way you think about these situations. Change the way you think about randomness. Change the way you think about unjustness or the effects of randomness and unjustness. Stoicism as school of philosophy was actually founded by Zeno of Citium in Athens in the early 3rd century BC. It's a philosophy that's informed by its system of logic and its views on the natural world. It says that the goal of life is eudaimonia. Stoicism essentially teaches that virtue is the only good. And things like health, wealth, and pleasure, they're not good or bad in themselves. It's what we make of them, right? Either we can choose to accept the situation we're in, or we can choose to battle it. Stoicism chooses acceptance, radical acceptance, in fact, of the situation that you are currently in. To live a good life, Stoics also believed that you truly had to understand nature and the sciences in order to live harmoniously with it. They also believed that somebody who radically practiced Stoicism would be emotionally resilient to any sort of misfortune. Because let's face it, in the times of the old Stoics, there was nothing but misfortune in the world. There is a lot today as well, no doubt about that. But in their times, you never knew what was happening inside you. We didn't have advanced imaging, medical imaging. We didn't know whether we'd be attacked by a neighboring kingdom and lose everything we have the next day. They didn't know any of that. So Stoicism had two very prominent authors or champions. The first was the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, and the other was Seneca. Marcus Aurelius wrote a bunch of notes to himself through his lifetime. And these notes, even though they didn't have a formal name, Marcus Aurelius never intended for these notes to reach the public or people like us. The name of the book was Meditations. There's also Letters from a Stoic by Seneca. So as you can see, Stoicism had wide impact on everyone from a philosopher to a king. The first thing we need to understand is, why did Marcus Aurelius, a king, turn to Stoicism? Shouldn't his life have been awesome? A king, after all. So much territory, so much conquest. Then why, pray, did he turn to Stoicism? Well, the secret is in his life. He was betrayed by his wife. He had to personally go deal with all of these enemy conquests. His faithful servants and court members betrayed him. And finally, it is said that Marcus Aurelius suffered from ulcer, which obviously in those days was not treatable. So he spent many years of his life in extreme pain. And not just physical pain, but also emotional pain. And when you're going through so much in a world that does not have antidepressants or any other sort of medication, you have to either invent or turn to a school of philosophy that helps you adapt or cope with that sort of world, with the kind of pain you are facing internally. Stoicism was that answer for him. The core thesis of Stoicism is the dichotomy of control. It's not just Stoicism that does this, right? A lot of religions also do this or have this thesis that you need to learn between two kinds of events. Events that you can control and events that are not in your control. If a flight is delayed because of bad weather, no amount of shouting at the flight attendant is going to do any good, right? So that's an event you can't control. and we take it out by trying to punch or use somebody close by, somebody we can shift the blame on as a punching bag. And we do a lot of this online, right? If we're not happy with something, we immediately blame the government. No matter how much wishing you do, if you are on end-stage cancer, there is very little you can do. You can't become taller because you wish it. You can't become shorter because you wish it. You can't get, somebody you have a crush on because you wish it. You can't do any of those things. So if things don't work out in your favor, learn that these are out of your control. And the way to deal with what you can't control is to completely accept your situation. It gives your brain freedom. Like I've mentioned in previous videos, your brain likes chewing on a problem. Right? Given enough time, it would chew up the problem for eternity. But accepting a situation gives your brain that freedom to let go, to stop chewing on that unnecessary problem that you've been chewing on for a while. So Stoicism literally asks you to figure out what are the problems that are worth chewing on and what are the problems that are worth letting go of. Stoicism also goes forward and says that you should journal. You should write down, because when you write down, it gives you an outlet. Instead of punching the flight attendant because there's a storm and the flight is going to be delayed, you can write it down. As long as you have an outlet that lets you put out these emotions, these pent-up emotions, and these emotions are about things you can't control. As long as you have an outlet for it, you will feel much better. You will be more resilient to this misfortune. And talking about misfortune, Stoics practice misfortune. They practice feeling what it would be like losing everything. Right? They do not get complacent in the things that they own because they realize, and in their head, they think about it. What would it feel like if I lost everything tomorrow? If I fell sick with cancer tomorrow, how would I feel? That should be my default. Because as you guys know, it's easy to be comfortable in the riches and the comforts of the modern world. But thinking about misfortune and practicing it, as they call it, is something that might add value to your life because you are prepared and ready when that time comes. Stoicism also believes that every situation is what you make of it. What situation you might call bad is a situation that another person might call good. So you have to find a way to turn the problem upside down and see if there's a way you can find opportunity in it. For example, if you lost your business because some new competitor came out, maybe it is a chance for you to figure out a new way of doing things, or take your learnings and build something out of those learnings. In the famous examples of Slack and Discord, they both actually started as games, and they both built internal communication apps just for their team. And as the games failed, they could have cried and gone home and said, hey, we failed. But instead, they looked at what they'd built and they said, hey, this internal tool that we'd built, why don't we make a business out of this, right? And as you know, the rest is history. Both are massive companies, but both are examples of taking a problem and turning it upside down. And Stoicism also goes one step further by saying that even in situations where you can't find a solution, that situation is teaching you something. If you lose someone close to you, that's a chance for you to develop fortitude, for you to develop emotional resilience. If you're dealing with somebody who's very hard to deal with, it's teaching you patience and understanding and empathy. So everything is a lesson as long as you remember that it's a lesson. And also understanding that one day you will crumble, the universe will crumble, everything that you know is going to be dust. In fact, it's not even going to be dust, it's going to be done, right? It's not going to exist. Understanding that our lives are short and measured gives you a new perspective towards it. In fact, Stoics perform an exercise called MEMENTO MORI, where they think or they imagine their own death. It's called meditating upon death, whether it be your death, whether it be someone else's death, whether it be the death of somebody close to you. Understanding, adapting, and accepting death, both yours as well as the ones that are close to you, is something that Stoics often do. It sounds crazy and it sounds like something that, would give somebody depression, but that is the point. The point is to get into a low mood because of, facing death head on and then overcoming it by accepting it, by radical acceptance of this fact. And Stoicism is also something that I think a lot of influencers today would, really find value in. See, when an influencer or a creator gets negative comments on the internet, they get very worried. And when they get positive comments on the internet, they get happy. But as Joe Rogan says, right, I think he said it on one of his podcasts, he doesn't even read his comments. He's neither, elated by the good comments and neither is he depressed by the bad comments. He says, I don't care. There is a healthy level of detachment. I love what I do. I love my fans, but there is detachment between what I do and what they say about me, both the good people and the bad people. So Alan Watts once was talking about anxiety, and he says that a lot of us try to fight these forces of nature, right? And that gives us anxiety. But he says, take the example of a leaf in a storm. A leaf moves with the storm. A leaf is one of the most adaptable facets of nature. And leaf's not the only one, right? Every other aspect of nature is adaptable to the forces of nature. Humans, because of the hubris we have inside us, believe that we can fight nature and say, yeah, come on, I'll take you head on, and not move. The problem with that is if the leaf never moved, it would crack. So similarly, you need to know when to take a fight with nature and when to let nature take you along. I always had a hard time swimming when I was young or floating on my back when I was young because I simply wouldn't let go. I wouldn't let the water take me to where it needed to be. I would fight it. I would try to stay afloat until I learned that it's about letting go. Anytime with nature, it's about letting go. The truth is that indifference, this detachment from what is happening in nature, the goods, the bads, it is truly a power, right? And it actually takes away nature's control over you. Because emotionally, you don't give a shit. Understanding where you need to interfere and understanding where you need to let things be. Now, a lot of people will recognize the teachings of Stoicism in newer age psychology like cognitive behavioral therapy. So a few years ago, we ran a course called Calm India, where we had some of the best psychologists in the country come and put together a course on cognitive behavioral therapy for anybody suffering from anxiety or depression. And a lot of those teachings are exactly the same as the teachings in Stoicism. So it's not like psychology is something that's completely dissociated from what philosophers of the past have figured out. It's pretty much the same, packaged in a new way, and obviously charged by the hour. I want to end this with what Marcus Aurelius used to tell himself at the start of every single day. I shall meet with meddling, ungrateful, violent, treacherous, envious and unsociable people. He prepared himself for the worst to come. And that is exactly what I've started doing on an everyday basis these days. And it's what you should also consider doing. All right, that's it for me. Bye.